Hey, GW coming to you live or on demand, however you guys watch me. That's cool with me. Today we're going to be talking about a horror film from 1987 called The Lamp, or some people might know it better as The Outing. Um, this is an interesting film. This was, if anybody who has seen the movie Wishmaster, you know about the djinn that grants wishes, but it ultimately ends pretty bloody. This was probably an inspiration for that film. Also, whenever I Wikipedia'd this thing to just try to get some general info, there were some critics that criticized this movie for scaring children. Now, this was at the time, I guess, where genies were a little popular and they were friendly, you know, much like later on, you know, Aladdin. But this film is pretty wickedly playful. It was directed by Tom Daly, who I don't think directed another horror film. I'm not sure though. But this is an interestingly nasty, playful piece of 80s schlock horror cheese, if you will. Basically, it's about an old woman who has a lamp that contains a genie, or a djinn, if you will. The very beginning of the movie, thieves ransack her apartment. They all end up getting killed pretty quickly, and then the lamp ends up in a museum, the Natural History Museum. And the thing about that movie, or that scene, or that particular segment, if you will, was that it's all done, you know, in sort of a wickedly playful way. The kills in the beginning are not really that graphic, but enough to warrant an R rating. The one thing I will say before I go into this movie too much is that the special effects, they must have saved them for the very end of the film. It's not a really special effects laden movie. Of course, the budget for this really wasn't too big either. So they did pretty well with what they had, considering the time frame there. Anyway, it ends up in a natural history museum, and it ends up that Dr. Al Wallace, played by James Houston, is investigating the lamp's origins. His daughter, Alex Wallace, played by Andrea Saint Ivani, or Ivanier, I don't know how you spell it, is going on a field trip to the museum in the film, and she sneaks a bunch of kids in there. And well, this is where you probably guessed what happened. Apparently, the genie is set loose and goes on a killing spree. Now, this film is relatively slow after the first initial, set of killings, if you will. But once the genie starts creating havoc in the museum, there is all kinds of craziness. You have, just to name a few, you have death by ceiling fan, impalements, head crushing, helmet stabbing, which is a new one on me, um, death by snakes. Uh, you even have a dead cannibalistic mummy biting fingers off of one person. And it's really fun to see, horror in a museum, because there's so many possibilities that you, as a director, if you were to film this, were to do. Um, the other thing that is interesting is that the djinn itself looks like a creature that belongs either in the Star Wars universe or in one of those 80s medieval uh, fantasy action movies. Now, what I liked about this film is that, yes, it was slow in parts, but it did take off. Now, I did rent this years and years and years ago, guys, from Primetime Video. that's when video stores were huge. I was a kid and I had to watch every kind of cool horror film there was. I did rent this one. The one difference between the film that I rented and this one is that this one has longer scenes in it, because apparently whenever it was put out for theatrical, it had some scenes missing or chopped or cut or whatever. But this is the most complete version. In fact, if you order this Blu-ray from Amazon, you will notice a couple of jumps. That's where they re-added scenes. As far as an 80s movie goes, it's not the greatest 80s movie, but it did set the tone, like I said, for the Wishmaster franchise, or that movie Jinn that came out. But critics basically blasted this movie, and some of them said that it looked like it was thrown on or filmed on a weekend budget. Others have said, like I just mentioned, that this film was just regularly out to scare children, which obviously for an R-rated horror picture would scare the crap out of kids. But when you look back at the 80s anyway, this is a pretty underrated film. This is one that actually, if it was redone today, would probably spawn a few sequels. It's better known for being the catalyst film, if you will. A lot of the actors, too, I don't really know that well, but I swear I've seen the girl who plays Alex, that Andrea St. Ivani, in a few other things. She's recognizable, but on a B or C movie level. In fact, that's what critics said about this movie, that it was a B or C level movie. I thought it was a fun piece of 80s, and especially for the 80s too, for the horror films. This one is a little bit, it pushes the gore envelope just a tad, but it's nothing too splattery or too over the top. The storyline, there was a lot going on in this movie aside from the genie killing people. There was a subplot where Dr. Al Wallace is, dating one of the teachers in the school. There was two delinquents who have a problem with Alex Wallace because she dumped one of them. Her ex-boyfriend and his friend sneak into the museum, and they try to, make the student's life a living hell. Now, this thing was filmed in Texas, believe it or not. I thought it was a Canadian picture, but I was wrong. It was filmed in Texas. This film is not really that memorable for actors, but like I said, it is a fun piece of film, and being that I watched this again after I had rented it years and years and years ago, and I have a crappy copy sitting back there somewheres. It was fun to watch this film in its entirety. The one thing I will tell you is the special effects, as I just probably mentioned, are not that great. Now, if they were redone by today's standards, would probably be top notch. The other thing I like about this movie is that back in the 80s and early 90s, they had this thing where the movie ended and they froze the frame. They just stopped it. Like Night of the Living Dead, that went to the black and white pictures. This one actually stops with Alex in a police car driving off and looking in terror in the distance. And it almost gives you the sense that this film could have gotten a sequel. And I wish it did. I really wish it did, because this film is not that terrible of a movie. And critics, I think, got it wrong because, yes, it's slow. Yes, it might have been slow for the time period. But when you go back and you watch it, it's almost like that film, The Witch. When things happen, it's incredible. But you can't always have, kill, 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 action, 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 kill, kill, kill. You can't do that. You have to have some sort of a story. And I think that's what Tom Daly tried to do in this film. He tried to insert a little bit of story into this to make it more of a sophisticated horror film. It probably didn't work or didn't work as well as it should. So, but there is a goof in this movie, two of them, and I want to point them out to you too, in case you guys watch it. Then you can see. In the beginning, there is a scene where Alex and her dad are sitting there, and her dad's making coffee and toast, and the blinds are completely open, letting the sunlight in. Well, her dad burns toast. He ends up putting it out. She ends up cleaning it up. And guess what, guys? The curtains are magically shut. No one touched them. Now, they pulled the same kind of thing in The Beast Within, if you guys remember that. But it wasn't with curtains. It was with a shotgun. Later on in the film. And I think I touched on that. There's also a goof where the security guard gets impaled. The spear goes right through his chest, like right here. Okay? When you show that, it goes right here. So, I wanted to point that goof out to you because that's called what they call in the industry a continuity error. But it is fun. You know what I mean? It's fun to check that out because some people look for those things, you know. But all in all, The Lamp is, or The Outing, if you will, is not a very bad film to watch. In fact, it's a fun little cheesy romp. You can't take it seriously, and it is a break from your, 80s slasher movies, your 80s zombie movies. It was just sort of something different. It just had a little bit too much going for it in the beginning, and it was a little bit hard to sort of pinpoint where the story was, but excessively a little gory for the time period. Surprisingly, this movie had only one F word in it. And that was even surprising to hear in the 80s because, unless you were an action movie like The Exterminator or something, horror movies just relied on gore and graphic bloody kills, especially when Tom Savini came on board. You rarely ever heard an F word, especially for 87, But then The Toxic Avenger came out and everybody started copying off of that. But definitely check out The Lamp, aka The Outing. It is a nice little piece of 80s sort of horror cheese. But again, if you go into this film and don't take it seriously, it's fun to watch. If you go in there and try to criticize everything with this film, you're going to find so much wrong. You're going to complain about the acting. You're going to complain about the storyline. You're going to complain about, everything about this film, and it's not going to be enjoyable. But if you go in there and say, you know what, I just want to watch a fun, stupid movie with goofy special effects. Now, I want to make point. I just said about special effects. These are not as bad as the special effects in the Kiss Meets the Phantom movie. I just want you to guys know. It's the same type of effects, but it's not horrible effects. The blood and gore are done pretty good. And even the kills, like I said, are fun. When's the last movie you saw where a girl takes a bath, gets attacked by a bunch of cobras? I mean, that to me is ingenious. It's cool, and you don't see that in horror films, which makes it an original, which makes it that much more fun to watch. So definitely check out The Lamp, aka The Outing. Like I said, I think I've covered most of it. And it like I said, it would benefit for a remake because I don't think this film is familiar to a lot of people. And I think if you bring back the genie, maybe make it a little bit gory, maybe make it a little bit, more fun, especially in today's world, you could set it in, like the Carnegie Science Museum, and you could do a lot with that. You could have kills, that were, insane. Like you could have a giant T-Rex skeleton rip somebody apart because a genie, possessed it. I think that film would actually work. But again, who knows? But definitely check it out. I give it 3.5 stars out of 5. Like I said, not the greatest, not the worst, but definitely an underrated film nonetheless. So it's my take. Tomorrow we'll be talking about the Italian zombie film Burial Ground, which if you haven't seen that one, that's a little bit of a doozy. You know, push some limits in the 70s. So we'll be talking about that film. Till then, GW. Talk to you tomorrow.